Hello and welcome to Retroformat Live Q&A. I'm your host, Sean P. Malone, cinematographer and proud board member at Retroformat Silent Films. We're an LA-based nonprofit dedicated to keeping the art and history of silent cinema alive. My guests tonight both have a very close connection with the Flying Ace and Norman Studios. I'm very honored to be speaking to Devan Stuart Lesley, a 20-plus year media veteran and People magazine correspondent who serves on the board of the Norman Studios Silent Film Museum, and Gerald T. Anderson, who is the great-nephew of the legendary Hall of Fame cowboy and Norman Studios film star Bill Pickett. Gerald serves on the city council and as mayor pro tem of Taylor, Texas, and he is the executive director of the Bill Pickett Educational Foundation. Devan, Gerald, thank you so much for everything you're doing to preserve and share this very important history, and thank you so much for joining me tonight.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, and especially thank you to Gerald. I heard you were busy earlier today taking care of some things due to the power situation in Texas. Is everything going okay there in your community?
Yeah, man, we were caught a little off guard with the snowstorm, even though they warned us with the weather. But in Texas, you never expect anything like this. And so once everything started happening, the Bill Pickett Educational Foundation, founded on Bill Pickett's name, organized a community grassroots effort to put homeless and people in need of shelter and hotel rooms. And we have 25 to 30 people in hotel rooms right now. We've been providing food and shelter for everybody.
Well, thank you so much for, first of all, for doing that, but also just for joining us today. And Devan, it's so nice to see you too. We, as I mentioned before, you're a key part of the Norman Studios. You serve on the board, right?
Yes, I'm a co-founder way back when, about 20 years ago, and currently am the lead of the publicity and marketing.
We obviously just watched The Flying Ace, so what can you tell our viewers about this great movie and its history and production at Norman Studios?
The Norman Studios, in and of itself, we're a 501c3 that's working to restore and eventually reopen Richard Norman's silent film studio complex as a world-class museum and film learning center. But Mr. Norman was a white gentleman, but he had a heart for race relations, and he was one of the first in the country to create what were then called race films, and those were films that starred all African American casts and were made primarily for African American audiences. Although Mr. Norman's films tended to really to appeal to both Black and white audiences, a very wide audience, which was very, very unusual in that time. His most famous and most successful film by far was The Flying Ace, and it was shot in 1926. To our knowledge, it is the only one of Norman's feature-length films that still exists. Knock on wood. I'm ever the optimist. I hope that one day we'll find another one, and I hope that film will be The Bulldogger.
Yeah.
But The Flying Ace, if we never discover another extant Norman film, I am glad that we have this one. It was inspired by Bessie Coleman, who was America's first Black female aviator. She had to go to France to get her training because America would not train her. She did that, and when she came back, she was a superstar, and she did air shows all over the country. Now, from what we understand, Bessie had seen The Bulldogger, which starred Bill Pickett, and with all due respect to your uncle who we love, Bessie said, well, if he's interested in that guy, he's definitely going to be interested in me too. And so Bessie reached out to Mr. Norman and told him how much she enjoyed The Bulldogger, and pitched him, from what we understand, on a film about that would star her and be based on her life. And Mr. Norman loved the idea. We understand that she and her managers were mailing back and forth with Mr. Norman at the time. And she came to, in April of 1926, Bessie came to Jacksonville to do an air show. We don't know if she was able to meet Mr. Norman in person or not, but we have to assume that they probably had planned to. Unfortunately, the night before the show, she was rehearsing and something happened with a plane. It flipped, it threw her out, and she was killed. On impact. Mr. Norman, obviously was heartbroken at this, but he still was very inspired. And so we believe he then wrote a story based on partly on Bessie and possibly partly also on Eugene Bullard, and wrote, produced, and released The Flying Ace later that year. Back then, it didn't take quite as long to make movies as it does now.
Right.
But it had two characters that were based on Bessie and or Eugene. Those two main characters, the flyer and the beautiful love interest, were both based on her. And so we understand that not only was this incredible film, based on these amazing, very early African-American flyers, but we're told by some more historians also that some of the very young boys who saw the film in audiences got inspired to fly as well. And some of those young boys grew up to be among the Tuskegee Airmen. So the film, goes on to inspire a whole nother generation of historic Black flyers. So it's a very important film, both just to film history, but also very much so to civil rights history.
That's wonderful. I mean, how do you know that? Is that oral history that's been passed along to you, or about the Tuskegee Airmen?
Unfortunately, we have not been able to identify a living Tuskegee Airmen. There are so few now, but we're told by war historians who have talked with them over the years and who have studied them and interviewed them, and that that quite a few of them, and before they passed away, in their early interviews, would talk about the Flying Ace.
That's great. Gerald, I want to throw to you for a second. You obviously, your great uncle Bill didn't star in The Flying Ace, but he did star in a couple of these Norman Studios films. So what can you tell us about your great uncle, and when did you first learn that he was actually not only a movie star, but one of the most famous cowboys that had kind of been around at that time?
My grandmother is actually named after Bill Pickett. My grandmother's name is Willie Beatrice, which was Willie B. And so from a very early age, we all understood how important Bill Pickett was to American history, not just African-American history. We still live on the property where Bill Pickett moved to from Jinks Brinks, which is outside of Liberty Hill. We still live on the property in Taylor. We still have the original deed from Bill Pickett's dad, Thomas Jefferson Pickett, who was born a slave. So we've been here on paperwork since 1890. And our grandmother always talked about the importance of Bill Pickett and our legacy and the history to rodeo, to African-American history.
Yeah.
And she just instilled in us that, we have something to offer to history, and stop looking at it as African-American history and start looking at it as American history. I have people ask me all the time, why do Black people need African-American History Month? And from African-Americans, we don't. We need them to recognize that this is American history. Yeah. We don't categorize it as a month. We categorize it as American history. Bill Pickett was very important to that history. He was important to rodeo. Even when I go to rodeos now, people understand the importance and the significance of what Bill Pickett brought to that field. Not as just a rodeo star, but also in the significance, as Devan was saying, in civil rights. This is somebody that was performing with white cowboys and living with white cowboys and being a part of that world in 1906 to 1920. This was pre-Jesse Owens. This was the time of Wyatt Earp and all these white cowboys that were being recognized for being great cowboys. But Bill Pickett was also a great cowboy, but he just never got his recognition because of the color of his skin. And I think that needs to be established and recognized throughout history, so we all understand that we're all part of American history, and there's no difference between African American, Mexican American, Japanese American. It's American history.
Absolutely. When did you first start really deeply caring about that legacy, and what spurred that passion for you?
After my grandmother passed away in 2000, and I was living in Austin, being an Austinite. I don't know if you know about Austin. It was keep Austin weird, have fun, live
Right.
life, be free. And my grandmother passed away in 2000, and she was always pushing the history. The rest of my family had moved to Houston. I came home one weekend and decided I was going to move back home. Went in my grandmother's room and started looking through her stuff and found all these pictures and all the stuff that she had kept from years and years of wanting to keep our family legacy alive.
Yeah.
And kind of took it upon myself to realize that if I wasn't keeping this history alive, nobody was. We have this book that we consider the family Bible. It's a photo album. And I have a picture of my grandmother with her sister, Lucille Brinkley, who's also Bill Pickett's niece, sitting next to her bed when they were both alive. And this is in the 80s. And I
Right.
still use that book today as our family Bible to show people our history and where we come from. So it dawned on me around 2000, 2001 that if I wasn't going to keep this history alive, nobody's going to keep it alive. I'm living in Taylor, not his hometown, but where he pretty much became famous and then moved on to Oklahoma. But they used
Sure.
the name as a prop. As Bill Pickett's from Taylor, but what was anybody doing for Bill Pickett? It came to a point to where let's stop using Bill Pickett to enhance ourselves, and let's let people understand the history and the significance that he brought to this country. There were
Absolutely.
4 rodeo sports. There's still 4 rodeo sports, 5 that are practicing every rodeo today. Still wrestling is still the only one where they know where it was created. So just the significance of that lets us know that we need to recognize the history and the importance of it.
I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and my grandpa, he's passed away now, but he was big into cowboy stuff and Western stuff. And every year we had the rodeo in Tucson, to which he brought us one year. And I wish he was still around so I could talk to him about Bill Pickett, because I think he'd probably know who that was if I know my grandpa. But it's so great that you're here to tell all our viewers about it. And like you said, if you weren't here doing that, who would be? But now our viewers get to benefit from that connection that you have. So that's wonderful. Devan, Gerald talked about the value of, preserving history, caring about history. When did you first get involved in Norman Studios, and what was it that spurred you on to try to protect not only the buildings there, but also just the legacy of what had taken place there?
Okay. Well, it's kind of a two-parter. I grew up in Jacksonville, and for a couple of years, I actually lived a couple of blocks away from the Norman Studios. Now, this time, no one really knew what it was. When Mr. Norman passed away in 1960, and his wife Gloria stayed there. She ran a dance studio there for a while, and when she got on up in age, she sold the property. It went through a couple. There's 5 buildings total, and it went through a couple of different owners. Right around late 90s, a group of local historians really did some digging and realized what that property was, and got very excited about saving it. And so they lobbied the city. They got together, formed an organization, and lobbied the city to secure and restore those buildings. That was early 2000s. The city did purchase the 4 available buildings and raised money to address the structural issues and renovate the outside. Now,
Okay.
during this time, meanwhile, I'll have to backtrack a little bit. During this time, the buildings looked like they were just going to fall down, if you sneezed in their direction. They were in very bad shape. But I would drive by there before realizing what it was. And I always thought, there's just, even in its most derelict condition, there was such a cool vibe, that came from it. And I remember thinking, if I could own that property one day, I would create some, amazing, creative business downstairs, and I'd live upstairs. Well, at some point I put two and two together, realized that was the Norman property, because I'd heard the Norman story. But I finally realized that was the property. And that's exactly what happened there. Was they did something amazing and creative and groundbreaking downstairs, and the family lived upstairs. In the meantime, too, though, I was a journalist, and I was working for a local business magazine. And so I covered the early efforts as a journalist, the early efforts to secure and restore the buildings. And then when I left that publication, and it was no longer a public or a conflict of interest for me to cover it and be involved, that was the first thing that I did, was would call up and say, hey, how can I be involved? And so I became at that time the original group that banded together to start start the efforts. They decided that they wanted to cover kind of all of that neighborhood, because there's a lot of other amazing historical things that went on there.
Right.
And the Norman project really proved to be big enough that it needed its own nonprofit. And so that's when we kind of branched off and formed the organization that is doing that effort now.
Well, from what I understand, before production really moved out to Hollywood in the mid-teens, Jacksonville was really a destination for New York-based motion picture companies to take advantage of those warm winters. I mean, something I read indicated that there were I think it was 30 motion picture studios in Jacksonville.
Yes, this happened around 1906 was the first. So 6 or it was early. It was during the aughts when a company called Kalem first came to Jacksonville. The industry, like you say, it really started in New York, New Jersey, Chicago area, but they had problems with the weather. The weather really limited how much they could do on location shooting. But going inside was tough too, because the lighting rigs that were used back then were incredibly volatile, and studios were constantly catching fire. And Kalem had just had an awful experience with a film that they tried to shoot on location outside. Along came a blizzard, and it was just a headache, just a disaster of a shoot. And so they finally said, we've got to find another place where we can shoot outside year round and not be limited to just a couple of months. And so they put a scout on the train, sent him south. He ended up in Jacksonville, comes off the train. And an interesting thing was just a few years before, in 1901, Jacksonville's entire downtown was burned to the ground. It was called the Great Fire of 1901, and it's made headlines around the world. But because of that, what came of that was, just out of necessity, we had to rebuild. And so when this scout came off the train, he sees this beautiful, ultra modern, downtown. We were the most modern downtown, in all the country.
Right.
But we still had, the countryside and the beaches, and just a really varied terrain in Jacksonville. And so that scout messaged back and said, hey, I think we found our new home. Let's shoot down here and see what happens. So they came down. The next year, they released the first of a series of films. One of those films was called I believe it was called a Florida Feud, Love in the Everglades. The subject matter had to do with a couple that was fighting. The husband kills the wife and drags her body into the swamp. Immediately, this movie comes out, and immediately all of Florida is mad. Or how dare you portray us in this light? This is not how Florida is. Problem was, all the filmmakers up north were looking at it and thinking, look at that scenery. Oh my God, that's gorgeous. It's beautiful. Look at all the greenery and the sun. And so they were amazed. And that really was the genesis of the film industry coming to Jacksonville. I can take you through a couple of the reasons that it left, but we did have, a very short but important time, as the winter film capital of the world.
Gerald, have you had a chance to visit the Norman Studios in Florida?
I have not. The closest I've gotten is Orlando, where Devan and I met for the first time in person after a 10-year relationship, maybe online, and through emails and phone calls, and so I have not had a chance to visit Norman Studios, but I'm looking forward to it.
What is happening in your hometown of Taylor right now in terms of preserving the legacy of Bill Pickett?
Over this year, not a lot, but over the last 5 or 7 years, we've gotten a road named after him, which is Bill Pickett Trail. We've gotten a statue of him put in downtown, and we just have a lot of important history going on with Taylor, with people recognizing our important history. We have Tex Avery, who was raised in Taylor, who created the Looney Tune characters. He's from Taylor. We have the youngest governor in state history who's from Taylor. We have a guy named Dr. Dickey who's from Taylor, who was a Black doctor and became Citizen of the Year in the 1950s. So there's a resurgence of recognizing the history and the importance of the history in the state of Texas. But maybe I'm a little biased, but Bill Pickett is the most important of all those people that created history from this town. So we have a lot going on. We have a lot of people recognizing his importance. We've had the state legislature at the state of Texas in 2016 give him a resolution recognizing April 16th as Bill Pickett Day in the state of Texas.
Oh, wow.
The city of Austin recognized December 5th as Bill Pickett Day in Austin. He's been inducted into the Pro Sports Hall of Fame in Oklahoma, where I went and accepted the award on his behalf. The 101 Ranch up in Ponca City invited me and my daughter up to be a part of their rodeo, and they inducted Bill Pickett to be a member of the board for the 101 Ranch for lifetime.
Okay.
And so over the past 5 to 7 years, Bill Pickett is finally getting recognized for the significance that he had in the rodeo world as well as American history. And I'm not trying to take any credit for this, but he was just kind of fading to history. And they say as long as someone speaks your name, you never die. And I kind of took that upon myself to continue to speak his name, to continue to speak his legacy. I do exhibits and presentations about him throughout Central Texas. I'm actually March 4th, I'm doing a presentation with the Sun City Senior University, which is Sun City. I don't know if you know, is a senior community. They have them all over the country. And they also have these universities. I'm going to be doing a class for them. And I do stuff with the Wilco Museum to keep the history alive. I do stuff with the Taylor Library. I've done stuff with schools throughout this area. And so his name is staying alive. It's actually picking up more steam than it has in the past 20 or 30 years after my grandmother passed away when she was doing all of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I understand too, you're going to be speaking to some kids soon through one of the Retroformat education.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Devan is my agent, but neither one of us get paid. So she
well,
he's my unpaid agent.
that makes 3 of us, by the way.
And I'm the unpaid talent. And so
love it.
I'm actually part of a movie that they made. Some students who are getting their master's degree from the University of Chicago are doing a movie about Bill Pickett. It's loosely based on Bill Pickett. It's about a 9-year-old kid who's telling people that his great-grandpa was a famous Black cowboy and nobody believes him. And so they reached out to Devan. Devan reached out to me, and I'm a part of that. And so there's a lot going on with the history and being able to tell the story about it. We also have the Bill Pickett Educational Foundation, which started as a way to promote the history and legacy of Bill Pickett and Western heritage.
Okay.
but it also morphed into a community service foundation, which is a 501c3. And we do a toy drive every year in the city of Taylor for children surrounding area. We average about 250 to 300 kids that we provide toys to.
Yeah.
This year was our first year to do free airplane and helicopter rides for kids, most of which have never been on an airplane or a helicopter. We take 45 girls to see the Nutcracker Ballet every year. We charter a bus. And I don't know if people realize it, but in every Longhorn Steakhouse is a picture of Bill Pickett. And in the Longhorn Steakhouse, Bill Pickett is the only picture that's in every Longhorn Steakhouse. So we partnered with them. And when we take these girls to see the Nutcracker, they provide dinner for these young ladies.
Oh,
The 7
wonderful.
managing partners are waiters and waitresses. And so these young ladies get first class service. They ride on a chartered bus, and it's a night to remember. And
Yeah.
we're partnered with Ballet Austin to do that. They have a program called Night of the Community, and it's the last dance rehearsal, but they allow people to come and watch that for free. So these young ladies get to go watch a ballet for free. Right now, the Bill Pickett Educational Foundation is involved in providing free rooms and shelter for people to get out of this blizzard 2021 or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Continuation of 2020, whatever you want to call it. And so we're involved in that. We provided over 20 rooms and protected 30 people roughly from being stuck out in the elements where honestly, I think some people would have been killed if they weren't allowed to seek warm shelter. So we're keeping Bill Pickett's name alive, not just with the history, but also we're giving back to the community because I'm pretty sure that's what he would have wanted. That's the type of person my mother was. That's the type of person my grandmother was. So I feel that it's our family legacy to always give back and make sure that we take care of people in our community.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with me. Devan, you mentioned the story of how Norman Studios was identified as a historic landmark, right? And how these group of folks really corralled resources to protect it. Can you tell me a little bit about where it's at right now and what you guys want to do in the future, in the next few years with the Norman Studios?
Absolutely. Just a couple of years ago, the city of Jacksonville earmarked $1 million to help us with restoring the main building. Like I said, there are 5 buildings. The main front building is where where Mr. Norman's offices were, and also he processed all his own film, and so the processing lab was in that front building. There's also a smaller building that holds his generators that are still there, a century old, a wardrobe cottage, and a prop storage garage. The 5th building is owned by a church, and they want to sell it back to us when we're able to purchase that. But that building, the back part of it used to open up like folding doors, and there was a large stage that rolled out from underneath it, and that was where Mr. Norman was able to shoot interior scenes, but he was able to use the sunlight. But all of those buildings still exist. The $1 million that was appropriated from the city will help us to cover just some of the basics of that main front building. It would allow us to to get climate control in there, bathrooms, all of the very basics that you need to then be able to raise that second round of funding and finish it out, as a full-on museum. And we're talking right now with several museum developers about really kind of laying out the vision and the plan for what that's going to look like. Eventually, we want to be able to have a museum that's open all year. Right now, they're in the midst of that renovation, so it's closed. But when they're done, we do appointment only tours. But the plan is to be able to be open all the time, to become a world-class museum and learning center and research center. My big dream is to be able to have summer camps there, particularly for at-risk kids. Bring them in and teach them about all the different roles that they can play in, in filmmaking, not just actor and director, but, teach them how what producing means, what, what's involved in costume design and all the things. There's so much in making a film that really goes right back to what they can learn in the classrooms. And I'd love to be able to see them come out, spend some time learning, make their own film. And then at the end of the summer, we have a big, red carpet screening for them. So those are, dreams that are, into the future. It's going to depend on, a lot of funding and a lot of volunteer help and, just a lot of support from the communities.
I could even see you guys using the Flying Ace as sort of a template to show them, hey, this is how it was done here, 100 years ago. And, you can do something similar.
And special effects too. Mr. Norman advertised the Flying Ace as the most thrilling airplane adventure ever, and the truth was the planes never left the ground.
Right.
The main plane that he used, and there was a scene where the plane supposedly flipped upside down in the air. He just flipped the camera upside down.
Right.
And it worked beautifully. It worked for for the audiences back then that that had never that certainly never would see special effects of the way they are now. It was very innovative, for his time.
Was that the same plane he used for both? Because there's two planes in the movie, in the story. Is that the same plane?
Right. Our understanding is that the hero's plane and the villain's plane were the actual same plane. They just shot it differently.
It reminded me a little bit of the original Star Wars movie where, they only had one X-Wing fighter costume and one cockpit, but they just filmed all the guys, sitting in that same costume in that same cockpit. So yeah, it's
filming on a budget 101, back to the Bath Kid.
George Lucas wasn't the first one to do it. Well, thank you so much, guys. Before I let you go, Gerald, can you tell us where can people go to learn more about Bill Pickett?
You can go to Bill Pickett Education Facebook page, Bill Pickett Education Foundation Facebook page, and you can also just Google Bill Pickett online. I was in a hotel with a guy the other day who had on a rodeo World Finals rodeo jacket and did bulldogging growing up and had no idea who Bill Pickett was. Devan and I we have a documentary out called Chasing History because we kind of feel like that's what we've been doing with Bill Pickett. It's kind of going backwards. They made movies about Jesse Owens and Frank Robinson and all these African-American sports heroes, but not about Bill Pickett, who was actually the originator of all this stuff. He was pre Josh Johnson. And, short story, I reached out to the Texas Film Commission because I wanted to write a movie script. Didn't know how to write a movie script. Reached out to them, talked to the executive director, said, hey, I want to write a movie script about my Uncle Bill Pickett. And she said, can you come to my office? I said, absolutely. I go to the office. She says, I've been here 23 years. This is the weirdest thing I've ever had happen. 2 weeks ago, a guy named Michael Crabtree walked in my office and dropped off a movie script about Bill Pickett and said, if you know anybody that wants to shop this movie around, I'll take all the help I can get. So Michael Crabtree and I, he's done some small films, on his own, independent film guy, have been shopping this movie around for 10 years and we cannot get anybody to take us up on it. So, I think the best way to get the history out there would be to do a movie about Bill Pickett, to do an HBO series, based on his life, because it's really important that people know the significance of one of the most important African-American and American figures in history.
Well, I hope that moment will come, and just keep the faith because you always read these, stories about it took 20 years to make this movie or 30 years to make a movie. So,
my high school classmate who is mayor. So my high school classmate is the mayor and I'm the mayor pro tem. So 2/5 of our city council are classmates. And he said, man, you're going to be an overnight success in 25 years. So,
that's usually how overnight success works, right?
Absolutely, man. So it's about having patience and keep speaking the truth. And the way history is going, people want to know this history.
Yeah.
Before, I think it was Devan and I were friends with Bill Katz, who passed away, over the last few months, which is one of the most influential historians about African American and Indian history. And he always told me, man, they're burying this history, but at some point they're not going to be able to bury it forever. And when they do, you, Norman Studios, and Devan are going to be at the forefront when people want to know the truth about rodeo and Black cowboys and cowboy history in general. And I think we're seeing that come to fruition right now by talking to somebody as important as you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Devan, real quick, where can people go to learn more about Norman Studios?
They can go to normanstudios.org. That's our main website. There are a couple of other resources, though, that I would recommend. One is a book by Barbara Tepalupak, who has an amazing array of books on film history and quite a bit on African-American film history. Her book is called Richard E. Norman and Race Filmmaking. There's also a book that's been out for several years now by Sean Bean, and that is called The First Hollywood. And we also have a documentary. It's a half-hour documentary called Hollywood East. That is a half-hour documentary just about Jacksonville and how, our very short but very bright time as the winter film capital of the world. That is available right now on DVD, but we are working on getting that onto some of the streaming platforms. So hopefully we'll be able to update you on that. But first and foremost, you can find everything there on normanstudios.org.
Well, thank you guys both. And the last thing I want to say is, Gerald, I've got a hat like that at home, believe it or not. I wish I had known you were going to wear it, because I probably would have worn it too.
Good old felt hat is necessary in Texas.
Oh man, absolutely. Well, thanks again, guys, for joining us. I want to thank all of our viewers for joining us tonight. I hope that you found this educational and entertaining. If you liked what you saw, please consider making a donation to Retroformat Silent Films by visiting retroformat.org/donate. We rely on your support to bring you these great programs, and we couldn't do it without you. So thank you so much. My name's Sean P. Malone. Thanks for watching.